the Labour Party changed now that Jeremy Corbyn is the leader? Not just the Labour Party, has politics as a whole changed, and can it? That's the question. Okay, so I'm here with Hilary Wainwright from Red Pepper, Stephen Bush from the New Statesman, James Schneider from Momentum, and Liz Davies, who was formerly a member of Labour's National Executive Committee, left over Blairism and has happily rejoined over Corbyn. So if I could why don't I take Liz first? Everyone will have 1 minute just to set out their stall before we begin this debate. So the question that I'm going to ask each of you to have 1 minute on in turn is, has politics changed since Jeremy Corbyn became Labour leader? Liz?
Yes. First of all, the Labour Party has become an anti-austerity party. There's definitely fights in the Parliamentary Labour Party over foreign policy, Trident and so forth, but there seems to be a clear shift, a consensual shift towards anti-austerity politics. That wasn't the case before Corbyn became leader. Back in July, the late Labour was abstaining on the welfare reform and work bill, principally abstaining because it supported the cuts to the benefit cap, which is a hugely wicked thing. The benefit cap in itself is a hugely wicked thing. And now, post-Jeremy, at conference everyone, Tom Watson downwards, was proclaiming anti-austerity. They've been opposing the welfare bill. House of Lords, as we know, defeated the Tories over tax credits. George Osborne has come back and stuck those cuts into universal credits. That's an ongoing battle. But the Labour Party has become anti-austerity. That's a huge change. The other huge change is the respect for Jeremy Corbyn as a non-traditional politician that you get amongst most Labour Party members and voters.
Thank you, Liz. James?
I unsurprisingly think politics has changed hugely. I think what we can imagine as being possible is what has really fundamentally changed. I think we can begin to think about a very, very different society from the one in which we live, and where many more things that have not been up for debate, in some cases ever, or in other cases for not a very long time, are now up for debate. Tony Blair, in his last speech to conference as Labour leader, said there's only one rule in politics. There are no rules. You make your own rules. Now, I don't think he necessarily lived by that, and definitely I don't think his part of the party does think that. I think they've got a very clear set of rules to how they think the party should operate. But I think what he said is true. And I think we now have an opportunity to try to reimagine what the Labour Party should be for, and how we can try to engage the Labour Party with the rest of society.
Thank you. Stephen?
So I'm going to be the dissenting voice and say no. So far, what's happened is exactly what we would expect from history. You have a Labour right discredited by election defeats and perceived or to have actually failed in office. The only real difference between the Blair-Wilson model is that Wilson was criticised for not being sufficiently vocal in opposition to Vietnam, and Blair is criticised for support of the Iraq War. But once again, you have a right of the Labour Party on its back, a left of the Labour Party resurgent and once again on the up within the party. The big difference, of course, is that it looks unlikely, to me at least, that the party will split in two this time. So the question is whether or not that alone is enough to avoid the repeat of the historical trend in the 1950s and 1980s.
Thank you. Hilary?
Okay, so I think that there is an underlying change. It's a potential. We don't quite know. It's like a new dynamic. And that the new dynamic is that the party's opened up in a way the people are sort of back into politics. Because the Tories have always treated people, the mass of working people, with contempt. New Labour took them for granted. But actually people are not stupid, and people can see the kind of growing inequalities, the sort of material contempt with which they're treated. And Jeremy has given that expression, and in a sense it's unusual because in a way his anti-career politics, he's very determinedly not a career politician. That in a way has meant that it's not a movement about him, and that's not just his sort of modesty, but he's created a space into which people can move. In that sense, I think his claim to be new politics, to be championing a new politics, is maybe more important than his claim to be about reclaiming the Labour Party. Like Ben was very much about reclaiming the Labour Party. I think Jeremy's about a new kind of politics. And the question is whether, the movement that lifted him to office, because he's in office but not power, whether that movement can be a resource for changing politics more generally.
Okay, thank you. Let's start picking up some of those points. Let's go to James first of all. I mean, obviously there's an interesting sort of divergence of opinion, but how do you see this? Do you see this as kind of the same old, same old? I suppose ultimately the question is, do you see Corbyn as a sort of rerun of Labour moving to the left, Bennism, these kinds of things? Or do you see it as a new and distinct phenomenon?
I think it's both. There are definitely, I think there are the internal dynamics within a political party that has its own structures, and then there's one that fits more broadly into how changes in society and the economy are. So I think Stephen's analysis of the right being on its back, leaving space for the left to come forward, the centre ground within the party being able to go to left, I think there is quite a lot to that. But I think we are also in a very, very different society. So as Hilary was saying, the Bennite model, as far as I understand it, was that you had significant amounts of working class power. There was in the country through the trade union movement. It was highly active, and the desire was to make the Labour Party able to be the expression of that power. And I think what is new is that power is significantly diminished, and part of this process is opening up the space again, and opening up spaces plural, that popular power and working class power can be reinvigorated, and that then has a relationship with the Labour Party, which is new, I think, and which is different from the early 80s variety.
Yeah, and that seems to be the understanding that's very much threaded through Momentum. Is that correct? This idea of a social movement influencing politics. Yes,
I think, but also it's not. I mean, it's new, but it's not entirely new. As in, the Labour Party has always been, or when it has been at its strongest, it has been a movement. It has been embedded in communities. It has been campaigning, and it is in some ways just about returning it to that. But it's about returning it to that, acknowledging a changed political economy and acknowledging some cultural changes that have taken place. So it's, I mean, the way I see it, it's the best traditions of the Labour Party, but adapted to a changed reality at which Jeremy Corbyn has allowed us to think about as being possible.
But I'd also emphasise, I agree with you in general, James, but I think that it does require a very radical shift in how we think about organising. That in a sense, the Labour Party came out of the trade unions, so it came out of a pre-existing organisational form. But now, in a way, there is working class struggle, particularly around housing and around what's happening to public services. But there's not yet an organisation. And so I think that Momentum particularly, it's really important that it's actually about a new way of organising, which sometimes means a much more inquiring kind of politics, where you go out into the community and you find out, you start from the assumption that people are intelligent, people are social, so there's bound to be networks and ways of informally organising. So we must kind of actually inquire into what people are thinking, what people are doing, how people are already organising, and then how the Labour Party can be a resource for that. And at the moment, I don't know, I see a bit too much, we're back to, we're carrying on the Bennite project. So what we must do is get a resolution to party conference. We must deselect MPs. I mean, that's a minority, but it's one that needs to be not just marginalised by rules, but argued with in terms of what's happening to society.
Actually, let's not get sidetracked by the D word, deselect, which I know is, but we'll come on to all of that. But Liz, what do you think about this balance between, is this about the Labour Party and an internal struggle inside the Labour Party, or is it about communities, movements, networks?
It's about both. It's, it's absolutely right that the right wing has felt very much on its back as a result of two sets of election defeats, and the whole raison d'etre of Blairism, the thing that would be repeated over and over again, is this is what wins elections, and that's now been proved to be wrong. I think one has to be careful about historical analogies, to be honest. I can't think of an equivalent to Jeremy getting elected. There's never been a backbench MP suddenly elected almost overnight as leader of the Labour Party. There's never been a one-member, one-vote ballot in the way that we had, or indeed the opportunity for people to join during the campaign and sign up. So it seems to me to be completely unprecedented. And I think that...
But if you hadn't had the trade union general secretaries casting their votes to stop Tony Benn winning the deputy leadership, he would have got a bigger mandate than Jeremy did.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
I suspect one of the reasons why Jeremy was able to get on the ballot is MPs had they understood that the system had changed, but they hadn't kind of realised that the only difference I would argue between what happened in the 80s and what's happening now is that the shock absorbers within the party establishment they had given away. They hadn't quite thought about the consequences of giving it away.
This time round.
This time
round. That's right, but I think the crucial difference is actually the political environment in which all these things were happening. In 1980, 1981, neoliberalism was just beginning, and it was being piloted by Thatcher and by Reagan. It had already obviously been piloted in Chile and so forth, but it was just beginning as a sort of political world force. And frankly, it was winning, and it kept winning for a number of decades. One could argue it's still winning because we're not in power. The Tories are in power. They're making cuts and have a very clear anti-public services agenda. So the struggle within the Labour Party was also part of the struggle against Thatcherism, which Thatcherism was, came to its most ascendant in 1985 with the defeat of the miners. So it has to be seen in that. Now, maybe, heaven help us, we're still in that historical era, and neoliberalism is just going to carry on making strides across the globe for the next couple of decades. But I hope not, and I think we see the cracks in neoliberalism, and globally we see a whole load of opposition from the left to neoliberalism, and that's a big difference. If now is the chance to defeat neoliberalism, then the election of Corbyn is part of that.
Stephen, do you think people here are onto something, or do you think we're in a little bit of a sort of left bubble, not quite getting what's going on out there in the Labour Party?
I do think that there is a left. I mean, I think there's a left bubble within the Labour Party. I mean, I always have an iron rule, and I never listen to Radio 4, partly because it's good for my blood pressure. I only ever listen to music radio, and people forget that for political parties to be successful, they have to be breaking into those kind of 2-minute slots with a clear message about the future. I also feel that I'm a great fan of going back through the NS archives, and in '79 people thought that the right was on its back. Than think the political right, not the right within the Labour Party, and it turned out to have a capacity for regeneration. Neoliberalism is in crisis. This idea that then kind of the model of social democratic parties up until the financial crisis was this kind of Faustian pact with the financial services sector, and now that the money isn't coming, that doesn't work either. But neither does the kind of unadulterated version that the right prefers work. However, the historical trend is their ability to regenerate and their ability to use us versus them politics and their ability to play on security fears is much stronger than we've historically given them credit for.
Yeah. No, the right is very strong, definitely, as you say, the political right. But, those of us who are socialists try to spend our lives struggling against that. I'm not saying it's going to work this time, but I am saying that this time feels different to the early 1980s because of the broader political forces, and therefore it might work.
Let me just ask Hilary, how far do you think this is about the financial crisis, neoliberalism? And one thing a lot of people have said to me about Corbyn is that, yes, it's a left thing, but it's also part of this anti-politics or anti-politician feeling where they see him as the antithesis of the career politician. He's absolutely someone who's stuck to his principles, been in Parliament all these years. He's not like one of these people who go, straight from university to a think tank to a parachuted into a safe seat. But how do you think all of these factors interact with each other? Can you see this as just being about neoliberalism, or?
I think it's about the consequences of neoliberalism on people's daily lives and against the background of what they can see happening in the city and the sort of gross unequal consumerism. And I think in a way he's both, the financial crisis leads people to feel angry but powerless. And he isn't expressing power. He's not promising, power. But he does express the sort of ethics that people share. I think he's got the sort of humane sort of view of society that, millions of people share. I mean, I agree the right's also appealing to kind of values about security and so on. But there are these other values which are appealed to by Jeremy, which are much more to do with, helping your neighbour, a kind of ethics of, peace. And I think in a world that's become so uncertain, so unequal, then that sort of rock of humanity is very appealing. And because he's he sort of isn't a politician, a career politician, he sort of expresses the possibility that ordinary people can do something. And the problem is how to turn that into a political force. But I think it's quite potent, more potent than a sort of charismatic leader in a way.
Labour people need to focus. They need to look at these numbers and think, do we want him to lead our party? And they think over the fullness of time, remember, this person's not elected till September. Labour activists will go, oh, actually, I'm not sure I do actually want him.
In The Guardian, he writes, the Labour Party is in danger, more mortal today than at any point in the over 100 years of its existence. It doesn't matter whether you used to support me or hate me.
Jeremy Corbyn, 251,000...
The problem is this, you can have a situation where one wing of the party throws its toys out the pram because of a result they don't like.
I've just written to Jeremy Corbyn to resign from the front bench. I agreed to serve on Jeremy's front bench.
The left, I have to say, often gritted their teeth and put up with, for example, Tony Blair. Even when he invaded Iraq, they didn't march off on block with all their MPs and set up a new party.
4 months ago, we began a journey. Our aim, to win the trust of the British people for a different kind of politics.
What do Labour stand for? What's Labour all about?
Minimum wage and stuff. Yeah,
they take care of the workers and stuff, innit?
They take care of the workers. People that actually work hard will get paid.
During that time, we've shown that Labour can make a difference.
Today, the Chancellor has been forced into a U-turn on his tax credits. And I want to congratulate the members in this House on all sides.
In 2016, the Tories are planning even more savage cuts across the country. We'll defend those communities and the services they depend on. We will build an alternative to this government, a fairer, more prosperous Britain for all.
I just think I love his policies, and I feel that some of them will be radical, but I think that they could possibly change Labour for the better and change the country for the better.
Let's talk about some specifics. I mean, particularly because we've got James here from Momentum. One of the big patterns of everything that's happened with Corbyn has been these daily media attacks, and it feels like a lot of those recently have focused on Momentum, and you've been accused of being everything under the sun, basically. So I thought we could get from the horse's mouth, like what actually is Momentum?
Momentum is a grassroots network that came out of the Corbyn campaign, which is trying to do some of the things that we've been talking about here, about building the Labour Party so that it's more open and more participatory, that it can function more like this kind of movement, this network that Hilary was talking about, and also to reach out and organise alongside and organise with and mobilise with campaigners and activists that are already operating, and to build kind of community-embedded activism and community-embedded organising so that we can make changes within our society and shift things, we hope, in a more progressive and more democratic direction, and also move the Labour Party in that way.
Yeah, so what's the balance there? Because everything you were saying was about reaching out, and then you said, and also shift the Labour Party. It's that way round for you?
They're the same process. This dichotomy between the in and the out is, I think, is a false one. What we are, the Labour Party isn't this entity that is totally separate from the development of popular power, from labour movements, from social movements. The idea is that we are trying to develop this and develop those movements, enhance and help those movements, and bring the Labour Party more towards them. It's not a split organisation. That process has to run together, because we need to develop popular power, we need to develop the social forces that could change the country, and the Labour Party has to be those forces' political wing, and it has to be able to win. So those two things, they can't be kept apart.
So, Stephen, that sounds very reasonable. Where do you think all this fear about Momentum comes from?
Well, I think then it's partly then, in one of the positive things about Jeremy Corbyn's election is that people have rejoined the Labour Party who've left, some of whom do have sinister intentions in terms of their local parties. And I mean, actually, that has been a big problem for Momentum. Has been the SWP, has been the Socialist Party, has been these sort of various groupings on the far left. And obviously, if you are part of Labour's social democratic tradition, obviously you are not going to be relaxed about that. And there also just is historical paranoia about institutions within the Labour Party. It's the same whenever someone sets up a new group. I mean, look at the abuse Compass got for wanting to broaden out to the Greens, to the SNP, to the Lib Dems.
I think also.
Hang on. Let's do Hilary. Okay. Let's hear from Hilary and then Liz.
Okay. So I think also we've got to recognise that it is really about Jeremy, as we were talking about a bit before we came on air. In a way, we've got to start from the fact that the right, including the right in the media, and there's always, with New Labour, there was always a very close relationship between parts of the media and Mandelson and New Labour. It was really cultivated. And they just cannot, they're incensed by what's happened. I mean, for them, they thought a bit like sort of, squirting flies. They'd got rid of the left. It was crushed. It just didn't exist. So they, the fact that it's actually burst out in this way, not just a strong showing, but actually won, is kind of, a nightmare. And so they've been, I don't know the inside stories, maybe, and you probably know more, but, it's as if they've been searching for grasping any opportunity to get at Jeremy. So the latest.
I think that's some of the stuff about Stop the War, yes. No, continue.
Yeah, so I think that it's more that, because a lot of the the fear, like SWP and Socialist Party, they're not in the Labour Party. If you talk to an SWP person, the last thing he or she wants is to be involved in dealing with an MP, or they want to be simply building movements. So those in a way it's a sort of scaremongering, a red baiting, and it is, the whole atmosphere is becoming a bit McCarthyite. That whole, Cameron, it's like a feeding, the media and the Labour right are sort of feeding each other. So Cameron's slur on people supporting Jeremy over the war as being terrorists, feeds into this idea that Momentum is full of all these evil kind of small sects. And that's the other thing to recognise, much as I respect or have respected some people in the SWP and the SP, actually these organisations are very small, and quite, just discredited in some areas. So we shouldn't be kind of getting into a lather about them.
Yes, and I wanted, is that all right, Tom? I wanted to come back on this word sinister. Absolutely. I'm even less respectful of the SWP and the SP than Hilary is, frankly. But they're not joining the Labour Party. They're turning up at the odd left public meeting to cause trouble. They've slightly had the wind taken out of their sails by the fact that the left in the Labour Party is resurgent. And as Hilary said, the right didn't expect it. I have to say most of us didn't expect it. I had written off the left in the Labour Party for the last 15 years, and I'm rather pleased that I was wrong. So suddenly we've got this huge shift, and it's left the ridiculous so-called revolutionary left parties sort of a bit high and dry. And I think we should just ignore them. The point about sinister intentions is I was disturbed by the use of that word sinister. I don't think people are going around talking about deselecting MPs. But equally, MPs have to be accountable both to their local electorate and to their local parties.
Well, people are going around talking about I'm sorry, that is a fictitious statement.
But anyone, do you just mean the Socialist Party, or do you mean anybody else?
So let's take Labour Representation Committee's meeting in Waltham Forest, where you have people talking about, the naming of the councillors who had supported Jeremy, and it's important to get councillors who represent our values, which is fine and proper and perfectly done. Yeah, no, that you can say what's wrong with that, but you cannot say that and say people aren't talking about deselections. They palpably are. It is fine for a membership to want to remake the parliamentary party so its candidates to look more like its values. But in that case, you're talking about deselection. So this idea that you cannot hold those two things together. Those are You're like, either you want to have a conversation about reshaping the parliamentary party or you don't.
Okay.
But if we do, then that's fair enough. But you can't have that conversation not on that.
Can I just come back on this?
Yes.
It's not a national conspiracy. There's nobody sitting in a bunker going, we'll target them and them and them, and sending out the orders, and they get targeted. I mean, that is nonsense.
But no one's saying that's a national conspiracy.
And the rule book doesn't allow for that. And the rule book, which you probably know better than I do, there are a number of very difficult hurdles and triggers to go through before an MP can even be subject to the deselection process. If a sitting MP ends up in that position, that deselection process actually ends up happening in a year or two when that comes along, that's because they have lost the confidence of their local party members, not of Momentum, let alone of people who aren't in the Labour Party who might be leafleting and meeting from outside. Actually means that they've lost the confidence of their local party members, and that the responsibility for that is on the MP.
Yeah, if I understand the distinction correctly, it seems like, yes, there are people individually in local parties talking about this kind of thing, but Momentum is being accused.
As there are always.
As there are always.
Yes.
But Momentum, the central accusation seems to be that the purpose of Momentum is to organise these deselections. That's just not the case.
There is a fundamental misunderstanding about what we're about, which I think stems from a sort of 20-year disregard of the Labour Party being something that organises with people. And so I think the Labour Party is three things. It's personnel, the people who are elected to represent people at different levels. It is its policies, which are agreed to its various processes, and then it's its culture and practices. And the traditional will change the party model, it seems to always focus on the top. We'll change all the personnel, and then somehow the policy will change a bit, and then somehow will become a more kind of democratic participatory party. It will sort of work that way around, which I think is exactly the wrong way around. We need to be making the Labour Party more open, participatory and democratic, more embedded in communities, more engaged with social movements. That will make its policies more like people's policies. And through time, people will come out of those movements who will be the new representatives of the party. But it should go that way round so it's on a sustainable footing. The other way round, it gives us a short-term civil war, and we don't do the fundamental changes which is actually what we're about.
Yeah, and if party members are raising a particular point, for example, whether or not Britain should be involved in bombing of Syria, then MPs will listen to their party members, and some of them will change their mind. That's just a successful result for peace as changing the personnel. It's about arguing the politics. It's about accountability.
Yeah, I wanted to raise that actually, the question of Syria in particular, but also some of the other successes like tax credits. It almost got lost slightly because all of the stuff suddenly broke out about Syria, but the fact that the tax credits were essentially defeated withdrawn by George Osborne. I know there are various caveats about shifting money around, but still, that seems to me to be quite attributable to the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party. There's also, of course, the Oldham by-election, which we were told for weeks was going to be a complete fiasco and UKIP might win it, but then it was a storming victory for Corbyn. I mean, what it makes me wonder, and the question I want to raise with you in our last few minutes here, is can the Labour Party, can Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party win the election in 2020? Can we keep going pretty much like this, doing what we're doing, and Labour win the 2020 election? What do you think, Liz?
Yes. I mean, nothing's guaranteed. And it will be a very, assuming the person, it stays the same, it will be a very heavily fought general election. And the right, by which I mean the Tories, might win. This is a real, frankly, class struggle between the Tories and an anti-austerity and I hope pro-peace Labour Party. But with Corbyn as the leader, that's very clear. What was also clear in the summer is that, frankly, the other three candidates could not win a general election. Jeremy Corbyn stood head and shoulders above them in terms of appeal to the electorate and so forth. And we've seen that with the YouGov poll about party members, the respect for Jeremy that happens when he goes out into the country, and the Oldham West by-election, which everybody had written off. Stephen made a very good point on the blog, which is that possibly Labour Party members had started to get anxious about the result because the campaigning had been so targeted and everybody was out talking to undecided people and therefore weren't meeting firm, stalwart Labour voters. I thought that was a very good point indeed. But Oldham was a fantastic result. And it shows, at the very least, that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't lose elections. And I would put it much more positively than that actually he is an election vote winner.
And also public opinion, is very much in favour of a lot of what he stands for. So on nationalisation, over 60% want the railways brought into public ownership, want the electricity energy companies brought into public ownership. So actually, I think a lot of the commentariat and the right of the Labour Party, let alone the Tory right, don't have an understanding of public opinion and don't respect public opinion. But also I think the Tories have it's as if they're always looking over their shoulder now, because in a way Jeremy has brought public opinion and the people back into politics. So Osborne has to worry, about what public opinion is. So I think that was reflected in both the tax credit issue and in a way the war, the bombing of Syria, that actually public opinion was now has a much more palpable impact on MPs, because there is a voice giving it really clear expression.
I think so. The problem is we've been here before. We've had a situation where the bulk of Labour policies are popular with the public, but there's something about the overall picture they don't like. It's sort of too early to say. Taken in isolation, Oldham was, the 7% increase in the vote is relatively bad compared to the high point of the Miliband by-election, so the 11, 12, 13. However, it's better than the low point of... So if it turns out then the Oldham West vote increase is the worst by-election of the Corbyn era, then that would augur quite a good result. If it turns out it is the average, that would augur a slightly worse result. If it turns out it's the best, that would augur a landslide.
But it did seem like UKIP basically ran it as a referendum on Corbyn. Yeah. They had big pictures of Corbyn on all their leaflets. Don't vote for him, he'll put your security at risk, all of this sort of stuff. And so that was very much out there in this by-election.
I mean, the thing is voters understand the difference between between elections. I suspect. I think because one of the things I found surprising is every activist I talked to was miserable. My instinct is it was just that Labour's North West team, because every activist I talked to about Wirral West was miserable, and Labour won that too. I also just think that it's in the media, we're so used to the fact that UKIP are racist and they're a bit incompetent and they have all of these awful councillors, and we've kind of written it off because it's become a meme in the same way that Nick Clegg's unpopularity became a meme. And then at the election, it turned out Nick Clegg's unpopularity was still a very powerful electoral force. And I suspect with UKIP that there's the fact that they are this kind of, they give off this stench. And then in Oldham, you have people who they feel that their town has only just been rescued from the taint of the BNP. Then I think we had actually, what we'd underestimated is the strength of that bit of the populist right is happily much weaker than we thought it was.
And that's cheering, isn't it? Yes.
James, do you think, is it a case of, one swallow doesn't make a summer, or what do you think?
Well, we obviously can win the 2020 election, but let's not, you said just going on like this. I don't think we can kid ourselves that we're now on this wonderful trajectory and everything is going to be fine. There is an absolutely enormous amount of work to do. I agree with Liz. I don't think if any of the other candidates had won, we would have a chance of winning. Although, of course, things can happen. History happens, things happen. There could be an enormous crisis. The Tories could completely combust. There are ways, but we wouldn't have won through a positive change that we ourselves would have done, I don't think. So I think there's a huge amount to do. We have to get better, especially in changing discourse around things. So, for example, the security attacks, we need to change security around from the idea that if we bomb a country, we're increasing our security, to around our security in our homes, in our jobs, and in our communities. And if we are going to win, though, we have to do a huge amount. The Labour Party it's got 400,000 members or so now. It needs to be many, many more than that. It really needs to be a mass party. It really needs to be organising and mobilising and empowering and politicising people. And if we do that, yes, then I think we will win. And that is the beginnings of the trajectory we're on. But there's a long way to go.
And I think just one additional thing, if I can. I think we haven't discussed Scotland, and I think obviously that's crucial electorally. And I think there we're kind of waiting to see what John Trickett, who's been given the job of working on the Constitution, and he's opened it up in sort of, the spirit of the new politics. But I think he and Jeremy have got to take some initiative. Personally, I think they've got to be starting to talk about a federal Britain, because they've got to both make a real, have a real dialogue with the Scottish movement that's supporting independence.
Yes.
I'm going to have to talk about regional devolution in England.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Hilary, because that's all we've got time for. We do still need to do the 1 minute rule, which just means that everyone, as they did at the start, gets their 1 minute to sum up. Why don't we take Hilary first and then go back to Liz? So a minute each, just to tell us, if there are any sort of stray thoughts that you would like to get in, or a conclusion. So Hilary, but don't just talk about Scotland.
No.
I mean,
no, I suppose...
I can tell it's on your mind.
Yes,
but...
no. I suppose the Scottish example brings up the fact that I think somehow, and this isn't a criticism or that I've got an answer, but Jeremy needs to find a way of not just being a presence, but actually really rallying the people, the public that's kind of listening to him. So some initiative, like for me on Scotland and the Constitution, something that is taking the new politics into really, really challenging the British state, which means thinking about federal Britain, thinking about proportional representation, and real devolution to English cities and regions. That's one thing. I think also on his areas of real strength, like housing, some initiative that really gives a national platform to all the people that are fighting around high rents, around, the sort of privatisation of council housing. So I think there's got to be a little bit more initiative that gives people a lead. So there's a movement, but it has got a slightly more definite leadership, and that'll in a way sort of beat off a bit the attacks from the right.
Well, I think the argument with the SNP that Labour is having is, how do you achieve social democracy? And you can argue about the SNP's commitment to social democracy. I would say it is only skin deep. Others would disagree. But the way you win that argument is by proving that you can deliver social democracy by winning in England and Wales. Because the SNP's argument is you can't have social democracy in England and Wales, so you need to leave the United Kingdom. And the only way that you can do that is by winning over some of the 11 million people who voted Conservative. But ultimately, we presumably all believe that of that 11 million, at least 10 million of them would be better off under Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 and John McDonnell in number 11 than they would under the current leadership of the country. So it shouldn't be that hard, and it shouldn't be something that the left shies away from. They're trying to persuade at least 8 million of the 10 million, 11 million Tory voters that people think would be better off, then they should vote with their interests. So that spirit of 1945, one of my favourite election posters, everyone will be better off under a Labour government, ecumenical, open-minded, and getting together a big tent for a Labour victory. And I think we are at the moment some way off from it, but it doesn't mean that it can't be achieved.
James, any concluding thoughts?
I think that's absolutely what the project has to be. I think from that 1945 government, that we had 30 years or so with the Labour Party at the heart of that, a process of making society more democratic, giving people more power. And now we've had 30 or 40 years of people having less power and a society becoming less democratic. Now that system is in some sort of a crisis. And I think we on the left have to try to work out what are the institutions within a shifted political economy that are going to give people power and that are going to give people more control over their lives to individually and collectively. And that is a project which will benefit, yes, everybody. And our task, I think, is to mobilise and organise so that we can achieve that, and so that we can actually say that at the next election, life will be better for practically everybody when Labour wins.
And keep on the theme of the 2020 general election. I mean, I think what we've seen from the last two election defeats, particularly the one 6 months ago, is that Labour can't win by going to the electorate with a economic policy that is Tory light. And I don't mean that in a sort of slanderous, scurrilous way, but essentially says, well, we accept the public spending plans, bedroom tax is a bit much and we'll get rid of that, a couple of iconic things we don't like. That doesn't work. It falls between two stools. It seems to me that a Corbyn-led Labour Party can appeal to three sets of electorates that haven't voted Labour in 2015 and 2010. One is the voters that went to the left, principally in Scotland, because the SNP portrayed themselves as an anti-austerity party. I agree with you. I think it's skin deep. But there was that alternative. The Green vote went up and so on and so forth. So he can appeal to existing left votes who stopped voting Labour or never voted Labour because of Blair. He can appeal to the people who stopped voting Labour and didn't go anywhere, or younger people who just never voted Labour but didn't vote, were disengaged by politics. And we've seen that Jeremy, actually, you've made the point that he can be seen as the anti-politician politician. And I think he can also appeal to enough Tory voters in England, in the South East and so forth, those seats that we need to get, on the basis of public services, and investment in public services benefits everyone. And I think sufficient numbers of Tory voters can come over to Labour on that message.
Okay. Liz Davies, James Schneider, Stephen Bush and Hilary Wainwright, thank you very much.